Hello and welcome to Awareness Self-Directed Learning. This module is on the PACE tool. This is a full module showing all of the parts of the PACE. It will start with an overview, the importance for using a pre-mobility assessment tool like PACE, and then it will cover each of the elements individually. The P, the A, the C, and the E. The P is for the physical, the A is for aggression and agitation, C is communication, and E is environment. So we will now begin with the overview and the importance of using a PACE tool. Today's objectives are to discuss what we're being faced with challenges regarding safe handling and mobility, not just in the home care sector, but in all sectors where we're handling, repositioning, and having people mobile. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk just briefly about the fact that this is just a very small part of an overall program, and the main part of our discussion over the next number of modules is going to be around PACE, explaining why it's important to check the client or resident status prior to any interaction. We're going to discuss the components of PACE, and then we're going to take a deeper analysis into what those results may show, and then how you apply that in your workplace. So before we get into the PACE tool, why do we have a program for safe handling and mobility? Well, client and resident care is important, and safe handling and mobility is important for understanding the risks that they may be faced with things like falls and pressure, ulcers, and also complications that can result around decreased mobility. In addition to the client resident safety, injury to staff can be reduced when there is a safe handling and mobility program. So we know in our sector that we have recent graduates, whether they're LPNs, RNs, or CCAs, and then we have folks that have been working in the sector for many, many, many years. But have you ever thought about how much do you actually lift in the run of a day when you're working in our sector of health and community services? So the average nurse lifts in an 8-hour shift, and I know many of you work more than 8 hours in a day, 1.8 tons. So this is what 1.8 tons looks like. So every 8 hours you're lifting a giraffe. Now, if I'd asked you to go lift a giraffe, I can just imagine the look I'd get. So when we think about this is what we're lifting every day. So it's really important that we follow all of the program elements, but especially the PACE tool. When we look at musculoskeletal injuries that are happening in healthcare and community services, we know that most of the injuries that are happening with healthcare workers and residential care workers in community services, 80% of the lost time claims are reported as sprains and strains. So that's 80% of the injuries. We know that about half of that 80% or half of those injuries are directly related or associated with handling and mobility activities. So when we talk about injuries that happened as a result of repositioning or the movement or transportation or shifting of residents and clients, we have to think of some of the costs that are incurred for that. WCB receives over 1,650 claims every year, lost time claims of people injured at work. Of those, 80% of those claims are sprains and strains, and of that, 50% of those are related to resident client repositioning and lifting. So that all rolls up into a cost of $62 million a year is what we kind of pay in insurance premiums to WCB. But we know that is a cost on the system, it's a cost on the individual, and it's a cost on the workplace. But I think I'm going to show you a video that really really resonates, I hope, with folks about how those injuries affect you, not just at work, but at home.
The guilt was, I don't think anybody can describe the guilt.
I felt guilty because I felt like I wasn't contributing what I would normally contribute on a daily basis.
Most, if not all of us that I know of that work in the unit or anywhere in the facility in the district are doing everything in their power to maintain health and safety for our patients.
So do we put ourselves second? Oh, yeah.
And then you're wondering, is there something that could be done? Could I have done something? Is there something I could have used that would maintain not only the health and safety of our patients, but to ourselves as well?
I was walking with a gentleman who I had thought should have been reassessed for his walking abilities. Had asked several times for him to be reassessed, but unfortunately that didn't happen before the fact that I injured myself.
I felt, like I'm gonna cry now, I felt really, really hurt because if you don't have a cast on, it's not a real injury.
When you're saying to your co-workers, oh, I'm unsure, we should get another person and whatnot, you kind of get a little bit of feedback from them. Well, if you can't do your job, you shouldn't be here type of idea. I've had that said.
It prevented me from being able to obviously do much of my duties at work. It made me feel really guilty because I couldn't like mobilize any other clients for quite some time. It disrupted my home life and my work life because I ended up being put into a program where I had to go to physio 5 days a week after working all day.
My family, yes. My husband had to do everything. I couldn't even cook a meal. I couldn't. Peanut butter sandwich was, I mean, you're standing in one spot that long. I don't know why. Maybe my pain threshold isn't that great, but I was doing almost nothing.
You're tired, you're sore, you're not sleeping well. You get very frustrated. Your normal tasks of lifting a laundry basket, simple things like that, vacuuming for any length of time. It causes tension between family. My husband and I have had some rocky times because of the fact where I am so sore.
It affected my, being able to clean my house, do extracurricular activities with my children.
It's overwhelming. You get overwhelmed and things that you'd normally love to do, you can't do. Or you're taking a chance if you try to do them, and yeah.
Now looking back on it, I don't feel as guilty because he should have been, as I said, when I asked a couple times for him to be reassessed, somebody should have listened and probably followed through with that.
I'm lucky all of our managers in my department have done this job in some form or another, or are very receptive because they may be in a different discipline, but they've all worked in diagnostic imaging as the ground up. I
say to all the people that I'm working with, first I try to get them not to do something that may cause that twinge to begin with. But if somebody said to me, oh, I've got a little twinge in my back, I'll say, you should go down, notify either the unit manager or the time of day, be the supervisor, go down to ER, you should have it checked. I said, because a simple twinge suddenly could mean, oh my God, you got to get up the next morning and you can't move.
It has changed the way I think, in the way that I realize that I basically have to kind of be very careful and watch it for myself.
Down the road, that little strain that could have been treated right off the bat, or whatever the injury might have been at that time, unfortunately might progress and you might end up having to go off work, or 3 days off work to let that muscle relax, or whatever the circumstances may be. Might end up being, like myself, 5 months.
Making do doesn't always work.
Well, I'm going to have this for the rest of my life. And I've already been told I will have this for the rest of my life.
Now that you've heard a few stories from the three ladies that were presented there. It's always interesting when we're in a classroom setting. I always ask people, what did you take away from that? What did you hear? What did you hear from those three ladies that resonates with you? And I think some common things, I'll tell you the thing that stuck out in my mind in particular was the lady that couldn't make a peanut butter sandwich for her kid. And I thought, how basic is that? Like, and you're injured at work that you can't make a peanut butter sandwich. That's fairly significant. The other things that stick out and a lot of people bring up when we show this video in a classroom setting is that the amount of blame they put on themselves, that, it was their fault, that even though they had done everything and they tried to have the hazard identified, that they still blame themselves. And then I think the other thing was how much it affected their personal life. That yes, it affected their work life, and not everybody was accepting of them coming back to work and being on modified duties and how that made them feel, but how it affected their own personal life at home. And I think when we talk about preventing workplace injuries, it's not just about how it affects you at work, but how it affects you at home. Now, before we get into the PACE tool, there's a few misconceptions that are out there in regards to safe handling and mobility. So one of the common statements is you don't need to be worried about resident or client handling if the worker is healthy and has never had an injury problem before. Well, we know that that's not true. Manual lifting causes those micro injuries. Though you may not feel them immediately, that accumulation over time does result in injuries. And so what is the safe amount to lift? So the research has shown that that's 35 pounds. Now, I know that's going to be surprising to some of you because a lot of you have probably heard that you can lift up to 50 pounds or part of your job description says you need to lift up to 50 pounds. But the research has shown that number is 35 pounds. And when you think of you're trying to lift that giraffe 35 pounds at a time, that's the number they say that's safe for you to do that multiple lifting and handling over time. So you need to think about that when you're out there in your workplace, and are you lifting more than that 35 pounds? Then you maybe need to look at the work a little differently. So one of the other common statements is that mechanical lifts are not safe and comfortable for the clients as manual lifting. Well, that's not true. And a lot of times when you think of would you rather be in a sling and have that nice, smooth transition from your bed to your wheelchair, or do you want a bunch of people trying to shift and shimmy and pull and tug on you? So a lift is good both for the client, resident, and for the worker. So just keep that in mind. So another common statement is much faster to manually move a client or resident than to go get a lift. Well, we know that equipment that's readily available, obviously it makes this decision-making process easier if the equipment is right there. Workers are more likely to use it. It is less convenient to have to go get the equipment and bring it back and set it up and do all of that. But we know that the amount of time it takes to recover from an injury, if you have a musculoskeletal or a sprain and strain, is very significant. So even though it's not faster in the long run, and it's definitely not safer. As we continue on with the misconceptions, one of the common things that's stated is that manual lifting is less expensive than using mechanical lifts, because we know that equipment is costly. But as stated earlier about the effects of the injuries and those costs, the cost of a musculoskeletal injury to a back, shoulder, neck is very costly and probably costs many times the cost of a sling. And it's and a lift. And it's not only that initial cost of the injury, but it's the long-term cost of having that injury, most often for a lifetime. The other thing we hear about as far as prevention is proper body mechanics. And proper body mechanics is very important, but all the research shows that it doesn't matter how well trained somebody is or how much they use the proper body mechanics. If you're lifting too much, you're lifting too much. It doesn't really matter that you're using the proper body mechanics. So proper body mechanics in combination with that 35-pound maximum is what gets us our best results. Proper body mechanics on itself is not enough. Now we're just going to look briefly at the overall program, and I want to show you where PACE fits in. So first of all, the Safe Handling Mobility program is very intensive and it covers a lot of elements. So it talks about senior leadership and commitment, talks about multiple stakeholder involvement. That's from families to employees to the management team, the organization. The program needs to be evaluated and monitored. Hazard identification and risk assessment is very important. Equipment, the policy itself that you have. Then we have the training and awareness, and then all the other assessment tools, safety huddles, all of those things are very. But if we take a closer look where it says awareness, education, training, and competency, the PACE is nestled in here. So when we think about doing the PACE, which I think is very important and has a lot of direct impact into what happens in that moment with that client or resident, it is just a very small part of the overall program. So don't think because you have the PACE training that's everything. There's a lot more to this program than just PACE, but PACE is the most important thing you can do as a worker working on the front lines and dealing with those clients, residents, and persons supported. So now that we've gone over a little bit of background information there on the program and some of the common misconceptions, we're now actually going to get into the PACE tool itself. So PACE is an acronym. So the P, the A, the C, and the E all stand for something that will be explained in the video. But what is the intention of the PACE tool? So the PACE tool is intended to be a quick screening tool. And this is meant to be used prior to any safe handling and mobility activities. It is intended to be done by any worker. And what it's there to do is to see if there's an unexpected change from what is stated in their chart or their file on what their mobility, availability, or abilities are. The other thing is to remember that this is not a client or resident risk profile. This isn't the full evaluation that's done periodically or upon admission. This is just to verify that what is stated in the plan is still relevant for where they are today in this moment. And as we know, people's health can decline very quickly, and in a moment it can change. So it's very important that we follow that. Okay, we're now going to move into the PACE video, which is an overview of all of the elements of PACE. At the conclusion of that video, I'll be back with you to wrap things up. So enjoy the video.
Hello and welcome to PACE. PACE is a point-of-care risk assessment program. The word PACE is an acronym that represents 4 groups of strategies that can help reduce your risk of injury when caring for clients. The letters in PACE stand for physical, agitation and aggression, communication, and environment. The physical portion of PACE refers to your client's physical abilities. Some examples include their ability to reposition themselves in bed, sit up, stand, and walk. The agitation and aggression portion of PACE takes into account whether a client is displaying or has been known to display agitated or aggressive behavior. The communication portion of PACE centers on being aware of how you are communicating with a client and their present ability to understand your message. For real communication to occur, the recipient must understand the message. PACE takes into account both verbal and nonverbal communication, as well as barriers to communication, For example, language barriers or a client's hearing impairment or speech impairment. The environment portion of PACE is about being aware of hazards you might encounter when you visit a client's home. Environmental hazards such as snow, ice, and other clutter may be apparent as soon as you pull up to a client's home. Once inside, other hazards can present themselves. Some obstacles can be easily dealt with, while others may require a discussion with your client or supervisor. Now that you know a bit about the components of PACE, it's time to switch things up a bit. To use PACE properly, you'll need to switch the order of the PACE elements. Using this approach will help ensure you assess hazards you might encounter in the order that will keep you safest during the client care cycle. Is the care environment safe? Are you able to communicate with the client? Is the client aggressive or agitated? Does their current physical ability allow for you to care for them without being injured? These questions all lead to an important element of PACE. For each component of PACE, you will learn how to assess whether it is safe to proceed, you should proceed with caution, or you should stop and get assistance. Here's a high-level breakdown for each of our components. If the environment has no obstacles, the client can communicate and follow commands, there are no signs of aggressive behavior, and the client can function independently, it's okay to proceed. If there are easily movable obstacles, manageable communication limitations, a history of aggressive behavior but the client is not presently exhibiting challenging behavior, and minimal assistance is required for a client's mobility, you should proceed with caution. If the environment contains unmovable or complex obstacles, communication is not possible, the client is showing signs of moderate agitation and aggression, and requires moderate to maximum assistance for mobility, you should stop and get assistance. As you explore the full videos for each PACE component, you'll gain a much greater understanding of this important assessment process. Unpredictability will always be part of client care, but by using PACE properly, you can help ensure getting injured on the job is not. That way, your clients get the care they need, and you get home safe to what matters most.
So I hope that video helped really explains all the elements of PACE. And I know you're probably thinking, it's just one more thing we have to do, and we're already overworked and we have a lot on our plates and we don't have a lot of time. But I just want to remind you that many of you are probably doing a lot of this anyways. When you go into the environment, you're looking around, you try to understand if the person has a history of violence. You know right away when you start communicating with the person, has their communication changed from your previous visit, or is it different from what the report may say or the chart may say? And what the PACE tool does is really provide structure to what you're already doing. So I want to thank you for participating in this overview. There are 4 other videos. We get into more detail with each of the videos around the P, the A, the C, and the E, although you know we do them in the reverse order. So the next video that I would recommend is the second module, which is the E. Thank you. As well, once you finish out the video, there is a small test at the end for you to complete. Fill in your name and all of the information, and then you should get a certificate once you get 100% right. If you don't get 100% right, go back in and try again, and once you get 100%, you'll get your certificate. Thank you.
This module is about assessing the E in PACE, which stands for environment. As a healthcare worker, your environment can vary greatly from day to day. If the right precautions are not taken, seasonal environmental risks such as ice and snow can cause serious injury due to slips and falls. Thankfully, seasonal environmental hazards are not with us all year long. But there are other hazards you should always be aware of. Your first point of contact with potential hazards is most often when you are approaching a client's home. Many hazards can present themselves before you even enter the front door. Things that can cause slips and trips, such as uneven pavement, puddles, lawn mowers and power cords, garden hoses, broken lawn furniture, unleashed pets, and other general clutter. Once you move inside, you are faced with new potential hazards. Some obstacles are easily dealt with, such as tidying up cords and moving objects out of the way, while some obstacles, such as pets and excess clutter, may require discussion with your client, a review of your organization's work-safe policies, or consulting with your supervisor before proceeding. Using PACE to assess your environment involves being observant and thinking critically about your surroundings. If there are no obstacles to impede care, it is okay to proceed. If there are movable objects, you should proceed with caution. If there are more complex obstacles, you may need to discuss them with your client or stop and get assistance. By using the PACE model to assess your work environment, you can ensure clients get the care they need, and you stay safe from injuries caused by the many hazards you encounter every day. This module is about assessing the C in PACE, which stands for communication. Often, when we think of communicating, we think of sharing information. But that is only half of communicating. For real communication to occur, the recipient must understand the message. In any form of communication, there are three main elements: the sender, the receiver, and the message itself. As a healthcare worker, you are expected to communicate with clients on a regular basis. Like all elements of PACE, you need to assess if it's okay to proceed when giving care, proceed with caution, or stop and get assistance. Communication between people can be either verbal or nonverbal. Verbal communication includes things like face-to-face conversation, phone calls, voicemails, or emails and text messages. Nonverbal communication consists of things like body language and facial expressions. There are up to 21 different ways our face can convey our emotions. It is vital that you are aware of what your facial expressions and body language are communicating. Let's use PACE to assess a client's ability to communicate and how you should proceed with caring for a client. If a client can answer simple questions such as, "How are you today?" and can follow simple instructions such as, "Can you bend your knees?" even if those instructions involve the need for nonverbal cues, it is okay to proceed. If a client is unable to respond to your questions or instructions due to a hearing impairment, a speech impairment, or a language barrier, but is able to respond to nonverbal cues, you should proceed with caution. It's time to stop and get assistance if a client can't answer simple questions, can't follow simple instructions, or respond to nonverbal cues. Getting assistance may include contacting your supervisor, consulting your care plan, or stepping back and trying another approach. By using PACE to properly assess how you are communicating and your client's ability to communicate, you can help ensure they get the care they need, and you can remain safe from injuries caused by violence and challenging behavior. This module is about the A in PACE, which stands for agitation and aggression. As a healthcare worker, many of you have experienced violence in the workplace that resulted in injuries. Injuries caused by pinches, punches, scratches, bites, kicks, grabs, and other acts of violence from clients. The subject matter in this module is difficult because violent acts by the clients you care for are often not intentional. They can result from an underlying medical condition or sensitivities beyond their control. Think of a client's agitation and aggression as the tip of an iceberg. You need to look at what's beneath the surface. Many clients who exhibit violent behavior suffer from a cognitive impairment. These impairments can make them resort to challenging behavior when they experience unmet needs. Unmet needs may include experiencing pain, hunger, thirst, low energy, or the need to use the washroom. Perhaps they are tasting, smelling, or hearing something unfamiliar. Sometimes they are just feeling generally uncomfortable. In addition to unmet needs, unrecognized triggers can also be responsible for a client's challenging or violent behavior. Unrecognized triggers can be more difficult to detect. That's because even though you're doing everything correctly as a healthcare worker, the triggers may consist of things that are much more subjective and difficult to address. These can include things like wearing your hair differently, or that you wear glasses. It could even be the tone of your voice, or your gender. Because some triggers can be difficult or impossible to address, great care must be taken when assessing a client's likelihood of violent behavior. To do this, we must pay careful attention to the client's verbal and nonverbal cues. Verbal cues can include the client's speech patterns, such as tone, volume, and language choice. Nonverbal cues can include things such as threatening body language and expressions, or a refusal to communicate at all. And most importantly, you need to acknowledge the client's personal history of challenging behavior. As with all PACE components, using this assessment technique will help you determine if it is okay to proceed with caution, or stop and get assistance. It is okay to proceed if the client isn't agitated or aggressive, and this is not expected to change, as they do not have a history of challenging behavior. You need to proceed with caution if the client has a history of challenging behavior. This means they're unpredictable, even if they don't seem agitated. If the client is exhibiting mild forms of challenging behavior, but risk is not imminent, it may be time to use your training to determine if they have any unmet needs or are experiencing an unrecognized trigger. If the client is exhibiting signs of agitated or aggressive behavior, it may be time to stop and get assistance. This is when you should find a safe place to contact your immediate supervisor to determine next steps. Healthcare work is changing. The people you care for are older with more complex and challenging health issues. This is the reality, and we can't change it. What can't continue being your reality is suffering injuries at work due to client agitation and aggression. By using PACE properly when assessing your client's behavior, we can help make sure that your clients receive the care they need and healthcare workers are able to do their jobs safe from injury. This module is about assessing the P in PACE, which stands for physical. It's about helping you determine a client's current physical abilities and the steps to take when abilities are diminished. The process starts with a mini assessment. It's important to note, this is not meant to replace an assessment by a PT or OT. It can be completed by any healthcare worker. In this scenario, the client is lying in bed. The assessment involves prompting and cueing the client through basic movements. The PACE communication assessment should have already taken place before you start, as it is vital when cueing the client. To start, determine if the client can roll onto their side in the bed. Then, if they can rise and sit upright on the edge of the bed, and then balance with their hands on their lap. From there, can they stand and bear their own weight? Can they initiate a step? Are they stable and steady when walking? If yes, then the client is independent, and it is okay to proceed with the desired task. In certain cases, the client may require minimal assistance with bed repositioning, sitting, standing, or walking. Minimal assistance means you are applying less than 35 pounds of lifting force to complete the desired task. It's helpful to remember that 35 pounds is the average weight of a human leg. If less than 35 pounds of force is required, then you may proceed with caution. If assisting a client requires more than 35 pounds of lifting force, you should stop and get assistance. At certain times, the assistance of a fellow healthcare worker may be enough to help the client complete the task. In some cases, however, mechanical lifts and slings may be required. If you require the use of a mechanical lift, you'll need 2 people to operate it, and you'll also need to choose the appropriate sling. Sling choice should take into consideration the task required, the client's skin integrity, and overall comforts. You should consult PACE's sling resources to help ensure you are making the right choice. These are located in the healthcare section of the Work Safe for Life website. Some common slings include the universal sling, used for clients with limited upper body mobility, and the hammock sling, which is the most supportive. For toilet functions, you should use a hygiene sling, which is the least supportive. There are also band slings, which are used to lift and support individual limbs. Remember to inspect slings before each use, looking for signs of wear and tear and recording any issues. For repositioning tasks, which may be repetitive, you will require a mechanical lift and sling for any situation that requires more than 35 pounds of force, or if the client is bariatric. For less than 35 pounds of force and a client who is not bariatric, friction pads or slider sheets can be used for repositioning. A soaker pad should not be used for repositioning. If a soaker pad is required, it should be placed on top of the friction pad or slider sheets. That concludes the physical portion of PACE. By using PACE to assess a client's physical capabilities, you will help ensure clients get the care they need and you stay free of injury while caring for them.
You have now completed the full version of the PACE tool. Now that you have completed this video, please close out the video and click on the link below for the post-assessment. Complete the test and fill out the form. If you get all of the questions right, you will have a certificate pop up. If you get a question wrong, it will ask you to try again. Once you have gotten all the questions correct, there will be a certificate pop up that you can print off. Thank you.